Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. In these challenging times, one would say, how easy, difficult, or interesting is it to convince those investors out there to bring in their capital into Ghana? And has the situation also been compounded by current rising crude prices on the international market and even today's developments in Ukraine and Russia? How do you convince those businesses out there to bring in their capital into Ghana? Well, the chief person or one person who has the responsibility to do this is Mr. Yofi Grant. He's chief executive of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center. How easy, how challenging, how difficult in these times when investors are also reacting negatively to our Eurobonds to convince them to place their funds here in Ghana? All these issues wrapped up on PM Express Business Edition. Be right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we talk about the Ghanaian economy, international development, and investment attraction. And there's no better person for us to engage on this subject than the Chief Executive of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, Mr. Yofi Grant. Mr. Grant, I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you.
Caught up in a lot of things, even us at this evening, but you had time for us, and I do appreciate so much.
Thank you.
I know that one issue that maybe you've got some calls and all those things running around is the Russian-Ukrainian issue. Worried?
Hell, yes, of course. I must be worried if there's war or threat of war anywhere else. And you know, Ukraine is a resource-rich country. I think probably one of the biggest iron ore deposits in the world, significant oil and gas, significant manganese and all that. So it's a strategic and location as well. But it's an important country, and so is Russia in different ways. But one would have expected that in this day and age, you wouldn't have wars erupting anywhere, and we could solve our problems in a much more sustainable, conducive way. So Russia, I mean, the attack on Russia is serious, and it raises many concerns, especially for the global economy. Especially since Ukraine is an oil-producing country, and as you have noticed, the oil prices have jumped up above $100. If you remember, not too long ago, pre-COVID, the prices bottomed out, and oil was easier to even store water than oil because the barrel of oil was not, didn't have the worth of its weight, and so for a lot of the world, that's a very worrying development. People are dying, people are being bombed. It's a worrying development for everybody, and affects businesses as well.
You talked about affecting businesses in terms of engagement and investment as well. I mean, today we got to understand the number of Ghanaian students who are there. I mean, majority medical students. In terms of business relations, investment connections, has there anything got you worried that, listen, we have to quickly re-strategized in terms of to minimize the impact on us when it comes to the investment space? And
in the investment space, I wouldn't say either Russia or Ukraine is a major player in our country. They have in the past. There are investors that have come in, but they are not the major ones. But that notwithstanding, it's still worrying because, there might be areas in which they might necessarily have interest that could help our economy grow. So once there's such a development, and because of that, the doors are shut, we should be worried. But the worry is more on the global economy than, us. And once things like that happen, like the oil prices have gone up, it has an impact on us. For us, it's a double-edged sword. We are an exporter as well as the price of consumption of petrol on the market will go up because oil prices have gone up. And I'm not sure government can keep subsidizing and taking that big, taking the big price hikes of a barrel of oil and subsidizing it for petrol. So it's a worrying development.
I want us also to look at even the global connection as you explained earlier on, because we're just coming out of COVID now. And if you read the literature today, the doom that has been talked about in terms of even the global economy is worrying as well. And not just about worry, but it's like, maybe George, this shouldn't have happened this time. Just when things were picking up, even in terms of existing capital that are already in and the rest that we are bringing, now this is happening. It puts more pressure on the economy.
Absolutely.
More pressure on
absolutely. Not just our economy, but global economies. And as you probably would have read now, many of the major countries are making statements and imposing sanctions on Russia. Russia is a trading partner to many others as well. And once these sanctions happen, then it means that there is some trade activity curtailed. You've had all the major countries make statements about how unsatisfactory the situation is. And apart from that, then you see some other countries also mobilizing to ensure that they protect their interests, whether it's security or trade interests in that. And that in itself may be a major, should I say, harbinger of things to happen. And nobody wants to think of a war in these days, especially after the world has struggled to understand COVID and the pandemic, and we just are about understanding it better than we did before. The view was that the world will reboot and get back into action and develop and all that. And suddenly there's this huge threat happening. Destabilizes and disrupts everybody's thinking.
Let's look at some are saying that, does it present an opportunity for us to also look at some alternatives to try and insulate our economy? And I know you play in the economic and the finance space as well,
Right.
looking at your role that you play, and even your office is tagged as Office of the President as well, dealing with those people, higher levels and all those things. I mean, for you, what should be the alternative for us right now in terms of the economy because of what has happened? Some are saying that it's just a matter of time because things might change and the heat will be so bad for everyone.
Yeah, that's also a thinking that is there. I mean, I'm not sure 2 weeks ago anybody expected that there might be, a war which could conflagrate into a global crisis. But here we are today. It's happened, and there's going to be an impact on the global economy. And so every country is jittery. The interesting thing is that the African economies are not that directly correlated with some of these things, but the impact is still real. There are countries that trade with Russia, there are countries that trade with Ukraine. And once Russia has had severe and significant, should I say, sanctions imposed on them, it would affect those countries, even in Africa. But secondly, at this time in the world's development, any breach of security or threat of lives anywhere definitely creates shivers all over the place. West Africa itself is grappling with threats of instability for our democracy, and you don't want to think that it's okay to do so. No, it's not okay to do so. So we should be worried. We should be worried about the possible impacts on it, and the countries that we trade with. We trade with the UK, we trade with the US, we trade with Germany, France, China. All of them are worried about the situation in one way or the other.
How easy, some have said that, or some will argue sometimes that, quote, talk is cheap. How easy it is about sometimes this push that some of these things on the international development, on the international market, makes a strong case for us to look internally and even within the West African region when it comes to trade and all the rest. The reality is that we are so connected to some of these developed economies. Covered as well.
Yes, the truth of the matter is, war in the other parts notwithstanding, we believe, and I think that the direction of government is to ensure that we take care of our own and build our own markets in Africa. And we've heard that many times from the authorities. We've heard about how important the AfCFTA is to us in Africa, in first of all, creating opportunity, industrializing, and creating even bigger platforms for young people to have a future by industrializing. And then, of course, African countries trading within ourselves and with ourselves. But not only just trading, but also intra-Africa investments. And so how can we ourselves facilitate internal, on the continent, internal investments? How easy should it be for investments to come in from different parts of the continent, from Egypt, Morocco, Senegal, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, Mauritius, to West Africa. And how easy is it for West Africans who feel so and excited about the market, also invest in other countries in the market. It's all very important. And I dare say that Africa has taken a step through the Exim Bank, the African Exim Bank, and AFDB, and other partners in Ghana, the central bank. A new payment system has been evolved that will facilitate intracontinental trade in a very remarkable way, that you can buy in cedis and pay in shillings, and it will all be on one platform that makes it easy. Before, you had to convert into another currency which is not native to the continent, which made it more difficult and expensive. But now, you can actually buy in cedis and pay in naira. You can buy in rand and paying shillings from Kenya, and it makes it easier for us. So the argument of looking internally has never been more important. Africa is a population of 1.3 billion people with a GDP, a combined GDP of 3 trillion. And we expect that economy to grow. The estimates are that by 2050, Africa will be 1/4 of the world's population. Every fourth person will be an African. And so for us, we have a here and now opportunity to ensure that we can take advantage of that market. By 2050, the population will be somewhere in the region of 2.6 billion. That's huge. Can you imagine if you are in a population of 2.6 billion and you produce stuff? I mean, you definitely have a market, as against just looking at Ghana at 31 million. It's a smaller market. But that opportunity does exist with Africa today, that we can actually invest within ourselves, trade with ourselves, and there's a huge enough market to make it possible. Apart from that, Africa, having formulated the AfCFTA, now has convening power as an economy. Because we look at it as one economy, one tariff-free economy, in the largest bloc, trade bloc, since the WTO, that is tariff-free. You know, that in itself is an exciting proposition for the continent. And every country in the continent can take advantage to jump into the market and produce for the market. And so for us at GIPC, for example, it's important to now energize and engage the private sector to see the opportunities that exist in the AfCFTA, and therefore attract the meaningful investments that can actually make it happen for us to produce and add value to our raw materials and resources we erstwhile were exporting, to now create real products for the African market. And I think it's very possible. And so wars elsewhere outside the continent happening notwithstanding, we should be able to facilitate stronger intercontinental trade and raise the total GDP from the 3 billion to 3.5 billion to 7 billion as expected.
So, Mr. Gray, I know that some of these things have been, it's more of a work in progress, your offers together with other partners. But some have said that you think that the current development, COVID-1, this Russian-Ukrainian issue, should now put the pressure on us to fast-track the process.
Absolutely.
Even internally in Ghana as well.
I suspect so, absolutely. And the policy direction is first of all to recover from COVID and then revitalize our enterprises.
That's Ghana, of course.
Yes,
okay.
and for us, and as you just said, that's Ghana. We have structured a program, the Ghana Cares Obatampa program, to facilitate that. It's important enough, and it actually highlights areas of our economy that will enable us build back better, but also offer growth and employment to younger people. So in the Ghana Cares program, for example, you have specific investment opportunities in agriculture, in fintech, in commerce, in infrastructure, in health, and those are the ones that have been designed to make sure that the jobs are created to enable us accelerate our growth, you know, and build the economy back better. COVID, the sad thing is that the pandemic really dealt the whole world a major blow. You know, many countries.
How bad? I mean, you see the numbers. I would conjecture on based on reportage. How bad was the situation? I mean, we knew about the larger economy. Finance Minister came to explain to us. In terms of FDIs, how bad was it?
You know, when COVID first hit, the UNCTAD, which is the UN, basically, predicted that foreign direct investments will fall by 42% in 2020. And if we hadn't seen the end of COVID, it would fall by a further 15-16% 2021 going on. And it would take a while before we all recover. And of course, the expectation was that Africa would be the hardest hit. And the recovery will be slow. But we are seeing progress. We are seeing that, yes, that notwithstanding, the world is still in a recovery mode. And so investors are excited about opportunity. Secondly, post-COVID, there are all indications that many countries will have to reboot their economies. They would require the resources, they would require the raw materials, most of which are in Africa. And therefore, that itself also opens opportunity for investments in the continent. So it's a bit of a balanced scale. Whilst many countries during COVID then had to start looking inward by looking at their economies and seeing how best they can keep their economies afloat. And every country was affected. I mean, you know the number of job losses in the US. In the UK, companies were closed down, people had to go and sit at home, lives were threatened. In fact, there are two things that were most affected: lives and livelihoods. So first, the disease itself was bad enough, people died, and unfortunately deaths that came out of it because we didn't know how to deal with it. And then the fact that it became a global pandemic meant that many borders were closed down, quarantines were set up in countries, lockdowns all over the place. And you can imagine if you had to stop work for 3 months and go and sit at home, you know, you suffer. The government also suffers because it can't raise revenue. Companies are shut down. They are not working. People are home. They need to eat. They need to be fed. They still have to live their lives. So it was a major catastrophe in almost every country, in the US and all that.
The Bank of Ghana data, both Ghana's Statistical Service data, suggests that we are in a recovery mode in terms of the economy. Let's look at the area of FDIs. Have we seen things picking up gradually, or, George, is still early days yet?
Well, I would say it's early days, but exciting nonetheless. Because for us, 2020, at the beginning of 2020, we saw some good promise. Because we saw that the first quarter numbers was over 140% increase on the same period the previous year. But then the second quarter, when COVID hit, then that's when almost everybody shut down. And it was very difficult for people who had started projects to execute and come and talk to you and see and do all that. But by the end of the year, it was amazing what we saw in terms of the numbers, which increased to about some 2.64 billion.
That is end of year.
Yes, of 2020. We actually didn't think we'd get anywhere close by. 2021 was interesting too. And interestingly enough, in 2021, we had much more engagement with investors than we had had before. Everybody wanted to find out when they could come, whether the borders were going to be open, or whether things. But the numbers didn't reflect that. But if you compare to other areas in the world and other regions of the world, I think we were still holding our own. And that's testament to the fact that there was still a bit of confidence in the Ghanaian economy and the story. And people believe that, well, this was one country that was going somewhere. And I still believe that this is still a country that is going somewhere. Because if you look at other economies, they are still, you know, just like us, they're still trying to find how to recover. But we seem to be recovering pretty well. If you look at third quarter 2021, GDP grew by some 6%. And the expectation is that when the numbers are all put together, we would be growing at about 5.2%, which is an amazing recovery from the 2020 figure, which was about 0.4%. And Ghana was one of maybe only 26 countries in the world that have positive growth when the COVID pandemic hit. So, you know, we are holding our own, and I believe that despite all the challenges, we are still on track.
Let's look at the FDI numbers again in terms of 2021 and even 2022. Yes. What were the actual numbers?
Well, we're in 2022 now.
Sorry, 2021. I'm running ahead of myself.
2021, yes, we are still sort of putting it together. But we definitely, I suspect we definitely went way over $1 billion, which is commendable considering what had happened. And this year we are looking at some very big ticket investments, which if they do happen, we expect that will take the figures up north of $2 billion. Right now, our strategy has had to change and focus on the Ghana Cares project, the Ghana Cares program. And so that is our focus, because that was structured to enable us build back better and recover. And so the investors we are targeting, and this time we're not just doing the country marketing and doing the general investment. Yeah. We are targeting specific investors in specific areas. And it seems to be going
sector focus.
Yeah, there's a sector focus, and it seems to be doing pretty well. But you also know that investment is not a one-day conversation. Yeah. You can't just go to somebody and says, okay, I have this opportunity, $200 million, come and do it. And you say, oh yes, here's my $200 million. No.
Mr. Graham, since you're talking about...
It takes a while to consummate the whole, value chain of foreign direct investment in a project. And so it will take us a while to really see it. But I dare say that the interest is still there and the attraction is still there.
Since you talked about sector focus, there's this push for green energy that most of us who follow the oil extractive space are worried a little bit, where there's pressure on international financing groups to cut funding into that area as well. You always talk about, you explain to me that, Joe, the investments is a long-termish thing. Are you worried?
It's a relationship.
Are you worried that because of this pressure to cut funding to this area, that sector focused engagement, maybe you're looking at the oil sector, we may have some challenges in that space in bringing those giant Chevrons and all the rest to this market?
Yeah. I mean, that challenge is always there. And remember that when COVID hit, many projects were sort of either deferred or totally stopped. But it even started before then, when oil prices tanked. And so a lot of the projects did not become economically feasible, because you spend a lot more to bring out the product and sell it for nothing. So we did suffer some, stoppage in some of the projects. But at the end of the day, Africa produces about 10% of global oil and gas. And we need to still rely on those we need to still rely on that to power our economies to grow. And the challenge is, well, recognizing the fact that, we need to be environmentally sensitive, and therefore we need to review and relook how we do our things to achieve net zero in the shortest possible time, and then also look at transition energies to power our growth. Africa is still very resource rich, and we need to bring out those resources. Interestingly, Africa's contribution to the impact of environmental degradation is less than 5%.
Yeah.
And so we are not the ones significantly causing the global warming issues, although we have our own, bit of it. And so sometimes, technically, it gets difficult to understand how we are being made to curtail our development of bringing out all those extractives, which presumably are not environmentally friendly, and yet expected to grow our economies. I mean, if I'm an oil-rich nation, I will still need to rely on oil and gas to power the growth in my economy. And Ghana is resource rich. We have diamonds, gold, oil and gas, manganese, bauxite, iron ore. We need to convert all these things and monetize them to grow our economy. And so it's a double-edged sword, recognizing that, yes, you are sensitive to global warming, you're sensitive to global change, and mining, the traditional mining and the use of hydrocarbons have contributed to global warming. Then you are more sensitive to it. But if you require that to grow your economy, somebody's got to pay for something to grow your economy. And so that's the challenge that we might have. But having said that, yes, there are new avenues of green financing. And we are working assiduously with the UN and a number of fund managers to raise an SDG investment fund for SMEs and SMIs in Ghana to enable them, achieve their business objectives.
What are we targeting then? Are we looking?
Oh, we are targeting as a start some $250 million.
Okay.
But Ghana's economy is significantly dominated by SMEs and SMIs. They're small companies, and they sometimes don't require the 10 millions, 20 millions dollars to show up their businesses. First of all, there's a whole groundswell of companies that need startup capital, because we have a lot of young people who are now very entrepreneurial and want to build up their businesses and require startup capital. The market doesn't have a whole lot for that, despite government's best intentions of the NEIP and the GA, etc., to incubate and facilitate companies. That sort of money is not available within the financial sector. Then there are those who have taken the step to take one step further and need growth capital. And they are also once again challenged because in the scheme of bigger companies, they are small. They are still considered small. They are SMEs and SMIs, and a lot of funding activity to SMEs and SMIs is considered difficult for various reasons. So it's important that we engage in this endeavor, and we are looking forward to seeing that fund come in place. And
before the end of this year, first.
Well, we are working with it. To put a fund together is not 6 months. It could be a year. You put the structure of the fund together. You look for the investors who put in money, and then you also get the fund working. It's going to be a fund of funds.
Oh, I see.
So we will also help small fund managers to be able to support SMEs and SMIs. But it's important, especially in the aspect of what you mentioned, the market, whether you're now going to look at a different market. AFCFTA, like I said, is a very credible opportunity for us to build internal markets on the continent. And the interesting thing is, South Africa is manufacturing cars, so is Morocco. Ghana is assembling cars. And we have bauxite, which can be converted to aluminium to support these industries in these countries. There's also cotton in Burkina Faso, which can go on to build fabrics for cars, car seats, this and that all over. And then you can export that within the continent. So there is some opportunity to have an active trade engagement on the continent from our own raw materials without having to, export them to Europe and then they are processed and brought back to the continent. Us. No, we don't want to do that.
But just some clarity on this green fund, which I feel is quite interesting because of the SME aspect of it. Maybe looking at all other things being equal next year or something.
Well, all things being equal, by mid-year next year, we'll have a clear path of how we will do it. But there are quite a number of funds that are now, looking at green financing and financing projects that to enable you achieve the SDGs. Interestingly, in our reform program that we are actively pursuing, we are actually looking at better use of incentives. And one of the areas we're saying that, foreign direct investors that enable us achieve the SDGs perhaps we should look at them as those that would get the incentives, as well as FDI that partners with local people. Those are the ones we should give the incentives to, because they then enable us accelerate real targets that we want. Getting the young people engaged, achieving the SDGs, etc. But we are not there yet, but it's an intention that we have.
Talk about incentives. One of the biggest debates going on right now is incentivizing investors to bring capital into this country. And there's push for us to review these tax waivers and all the rest. As a chief investment promoter of this country, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's as a country, you don't want to lose income. And one of the challenges that we've had is how to raise revenue. And so taxes are very important. And anybody would hesitate to give away too much. But having said that to you, you are in a competitive world. And you're competing for investors into your country, especially when you don't have the capital, the long-term capital to develop. And so you have to juxtapose yourself with other neighbors who are also looking for investment. And you have to apply your incentives in a constructive way that it benefits you. It should not be used, incentives and lack of incentives should not be used as in itself as a disincentive to investors. If you give incentives, then it must enable them to grow and create bigger growth in your economy. And that's the way I believe that
we should still have it, but strategically apply.
You must apply your incentives very strategically.
Because some are pushing the let's even scrap it, push it off.
Well, I mean, so far as you compete for investment, it will be a challenge. At some point, you still think that you must give some incentives to enable investors. And the incentives should not only go to foreigners. There are Ghanaian investors, there are local business that must have incentives to grow.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what you want to ensure that government will have a big enough pool or resource from which it can derive revenues to do the things that it does.
So Grant, let's talk about the economy. And recently there were some offshore investors who were trying to sell our Euro bonds because of concerns about our fiscal outlook. These are just in the bond market space.
Right.
Has it also hit our FDIs in terms of those who are expressing concerns with our fiscal situation?
Well, not that I know of. I mean, I haven't had many questions about fiscal situation. Indeed, the interesting thing is that Moody's, who downgraded us, still considered the economy stable going forward. So it's really not about whether, you know, there are these concerns that it will definitely hurt us. The ratings are also about somebody's opinion going forward.
Yeah.
And there are many things that affect a country's rating. But that's for a different segment of the market that for us we don't even consider as investors. When we talk of investors in the GIPC sense, we are looking at foreign direct investors who look at projects and look at economies and invest directly into those economies. But, you know, I mean, for me, a ratings agency sort of gives you enough to think about as to how you go forward with your economy. And it's only on the fiscal, not even on the real economy. It's on the fiscal position that you have, whether you can generate enough to grow your economy or not. I mean, as I mentioned to you now, the Ghanaian economy is showing a lot of promise in growth. This 2021, I suspect that we'll end up with a GDP growth of about 5.2%, which will be a major growth economy in the world post-COVID. So that tells you that we are doing something very right. And perhaps our inability to rack up enough revenues means that we will think of strategies of raising revenues. And those strategies, we should believe in those strategies and let them happen and get the revenues to support our government.
Do I get from you that these concerns about fiscal situation, which is now, has not in any way impacted on FDIs?
Well, not that I've seen. I can't mathematically give you a correlation that says so. One would be it's been an expectation, but we are getting busier by the day. We are getting more investors visiting to find out what they can do. So my sense is that we are not seeing the impact on that side. Maybe on the bondholders, that's a different market. And that's not my market.
So Grant, in the back room, not to mention anybody's name, what are the investors telling you?
What are the investors telling me? What are the opportunities? What are my chances of getting those opportunities? What are the market conditions? How easy is it to do business? Those are the things that a lot of investors concern themselves about. And one other area is maybe stability of a currency. And they look at it and they look at it, and they look at it the short term, medium term, and the long term.
It's a concern for them?
It's a concern for everybody. They look at it short term, medium term, long term. And many of them will tell you, well, if I look at this market and I look at the growth in the market, in the medium to long term, it looks very attractive. The opportunities are there. It's resource rich. It has a good enough policy orientation. Government has interesting policies like 1D1F, which is an industrialization policy. And if it's going to be good for import substitution and create jobs and then create growth, then as an investor, that's what I should be looking at. I want growth. I want stability and I want growth.
A stabilized currency.
Well, currencies will go up and down. And the structure of our economies, when we start exporting more than we import, that problem would be stymied a bit more. And that is what I think the policy direction is, that we move away from exporting our raw materials and resources and now add value and export within the African continent and then also to the outside. And so we are not just looking at even here, we are looking at countries in Europe who export to the continent. Says, well, come and manufacture here. This is where the raw materials are. We are not going to export the raw materials to you to convert and then export back to the continent. When you can actually come to this continent, and if you are positioned to do that, build your factories here, build your industries here, and then you can export to the continent tariff-free.
Build your industries here, factories here, and it might be a good time to take a short break, and we'll get back on PM Express Business Edition. As you also be looking at domestic investment, how do we ensure that we protect our local businesses whilst we also try to bring in more foreign capital? This is PM Express Business Edition. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we talk about the economy and investment attraction in these current challenges and global challenges. How do we still attract that foreign capital to grow our economy? And Yofi Grant is the Chief Executive of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center. And we're talking about investment FDIs, and we're zooming it down to domestic investment. And I know that it's quite a big challenge. That how do we also protect our own whilst also trying to bring in foreign capital?
You know, I mean, there's a lot of literature that talks about protectionist policies. And many feel that a lot of them are outdated. And now it's the free markets. What is more important is to grow your market and grow opportunities in your market. I'm one of those that believes that. I mean, protection is important in certain areas of your economy. Especially where you have a strategic advantage, But some areas it may not be as important. The important thing for me is not as much the protection as incentivizing your businesses to grow. So that if you have a local business that's struggling, you must find a way to enable them grow and be competitive. That's a very important part of the equation. Because if they are small and you protect them and you don't incentivize them or give them the space to grow, they will stay little, if you understand what I'm saying. But if you protect them and you incentivize them and create opportunities for them, they will grow and contribute and become the big blue chips in your economy. So that's more important, that how do we position private sector as a major component of the growth in our economy. And I think, once again, that is clearly the strategy that this government has taken. And the Ghana Cares Obatampa project, the second part of it, and you know what it is, COVID alleviation and revitalization of enterprises programs. And so the second part of it, which is from 2021 to 2023, is how to revitalize private sector and investors to come and grow and reset the economy back. And so how do we position our private sector, Ghanaian private sector, to play a major role in the economy? How do we create space for them? How do we incentivize them? And that is why I said one of the propositions that we have at GIPC is to say, if a foreign direct investor comes in and he partners with a Ghanaian, then we might consider giving him the incentives than one that just comes in and wants to work alone.
Is that the new direction of
we are looking? That's the direction we are looking at. It's not law, but it's a proposition that we have to enable our private, small companies grow. Now, secondly, opportunities as the AFCFTA are real and very good. I mean, they actually create the markets for our own people, and we should look at these markets in a structured way. And I believe government's intention is to organize private sector to take advantage of the opportunities that exist. Just about 2 or 3 days ago, I was at a function called the Chocolaterium, which was all about chocolate.
Eating more chocolate.
Yes, eating more chocolate. And I was surprised at the interest and the number of small chocolatiers, artisanal chocolate makers who were in the market. Now, I think they can be organized to be a tour de force. And we need to do a lot of other things to ensure that we brand our chocolate. Just like how Ethiopia branded their coffee.
Yeah.
And when they say Ethiopian coffee, you know what it means. We should also be in a position where when they say Ghana chocolate, you know exactly what it means. By organizing these small groups, finding the necessary structures to enable them grow. And grow and take over the global market for chocolate, which is expected to grow to about $160 billion. And it seems all crazy when you think of it and say that Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire supply almost 70% of the world's cocoa, but every year that's only about some 6 billion. When there's a chocolate market growing at 160 billion, not to mention the other things like cocoa liquor, cocoa butter, the polyphenols from cocoa, and many other things that are in cocoa. So the real thing is to create a market and the space for the private sector to take advantage of these opportunities and grow. And maybe it might be government support, maybe it might be creating a financial system that also facilitates investment for them to enable them grow. I mean, last 2 weeks, I was at the Gulf Foods Conference, the biggest food and beverages conference in the world, in Dubai. Now, why was I there? Because we needed to understand exactly how the value chains of the agri sector are being harnessed. And guess what? We found quite a number of major companies in the GCC and the Emirates who were manufacturing chocolate and cocoa drinks, etc. And when you ask them where they got their raw material from, then they tell you Belgium and Switzerland. This is a market waiting for Ghana. You know, luckily we took along a number of young, agriculturists and young farmers in Ghana, and they were very delighted. I mean, for them it was an eye-opener. Many of them says, wow, this is an eye-opener. There really are markets for us that we haven't taken advantage of. And we've made quite a number of connections for them. The Emirates were so happy with that before the conference closed, they insisted that they wanted to sign an MOU of cooperation between the Association of Food and Beverages in the GCC and Ghana. So I signed that agreement that will facilitate investment that will enable them get the materials they need to develop the industry. But some of them were even considering, we had discussions with some of them actually coming to Ghana and setting up their factories here, because it would be more interesting for them. And indeed, we have one or two of them who are looking at actually coming to Ghana, and I can confidently mention one. Has been Del Monte, which is one of the big food distributors in the world, who are looking at, okay, can we come to Ghana and do some contract farming, have people do contract farming for us to get the produce that we want. Del Monte does a lot of fruits, etc. And so they are very keenly interested in our mangoes, our pineapples, and our bananas. And so they're trying to find how can we actually establish farms in Ghana to supply us for a global export. And that's one of the things. On the other hand, we also got the Ministry of Agriculture to the conference, and he's actually signed a compact in which the Emirates is actually going to have dedicated warehousing structures for Ghana cocoa products.
That's the airline?
Yeah, cocoa products.
Okay.
And during the Ghana week at Expo, Cocoa Board will be there to facilitate a major push towards having our raw materials and semi-finished cocoa products into that market. And I think that's how you grow your economy, by pushing private sector to take advantage of opportunities and then getting the necessary investment to enable them grow.
So you talked about incentivizing local business, and I want some education here. What is the current status of the investment cap for those who want to come and operate in the retail space in terms of your act? Has it been reviewed?
Well, it hasn't been reviewed yet, but it's a consideration that we need to review. The important thing, yes, what it says, the law says that if you want to go into the retail space, you must at least have $1 million and employ 20 Ghanaian people. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, if that is what will make our retailers grow. And so I really don't have a problem with that. The major challenge is that you're then going to have major players come into the market with supermarkets, invest the 100 millions, the 200 million that our people can't invest, and build these mega markets and take over the small retail trader. And it's happened everywhere in the world. The US suffered it UK suffered it, Germany suffered it, and so now you have big supermarkets who are doing the retail trail, like Lidl, like Carrefour, like Walmart, and they've taken over the markets, and they do the retail. The important thing for us is how do we migrate our retailers to become wholesalers and then to become manufacturers? Essentially, we want to move away from importing goods from outside and selling them. We want to now move to a position where we produce the goods and give to our retailers to sell. You know, and
because this local traders think that it doesn't favor them in terms of this particular investment act, and therefore we should have a subtle protectionism for them.
Well, that I suspect is going to stay. The 1 million will stay.
It's going to stay.
Yeah, it will stay.
We increased. The discussion is working to increase that.
Well, not quite. We are not looking at what we are looking at actively is the minimum capital required to set up a company, because most other countries really don't. I mean, they have eliminated, because practically it doesn't do much. But the law on the retail trade, I think it's
1 million. It should stay.
It should stay, and you have to employ 20 people, minimum 20 Ghanaians in there. And then, of course,
but you're looking at reviewing the cap for start setting up an investment.
Right, and also remember that as we sign the AFCFTA and the ECOWAS protocols, there are things relating to countries of origin of goods. So you know, if the fact that we have a law that says that you can, if you're West African, you can come in and stay for a period, doesn't mean that then you can come and compete with our own people in selling phones from Asia, etc., etc. If you want to come into our market, then bring goods from your country to come and sell here. We don't have a problem with that. If a Ghanaian wants to go and sell kente in Nigeria, I'm not sure the Nigerians will have a problem with that. But if he wants to go and sell phones and stuff imported from some other country in there, that one, I mean, I would have a problem with that.
So you think that this caption should stay and also protect the retail space is a no-go?
I think that for that, I have no problem with it. The important thing, and I keep emphasizing on it, is how do we create opportunity for our people to grow their businesses? It's critical. You know, how do we create 10 Ghanaian billionaires out of what we have? How can we move away and then start producing mobile phones here, assembling mobile phones here for the African market? How do we then start creating major, you know, furniture companies that can export to the subcontinent or to the continent? Those are the things that I believe that government is keen on doing, building capacity and empowering them to go into the African market. It's a big enough market, 1.3 billion people. And I did give an example the last time, say, look, if, you know, interestingly, I just, you know, it hit me that 10% of this country every day is fed for free by government. 10% of the population. How is that? We have about 3 million plus people in school who every day are on a school feeding program. They are fed for free. Now, assuming that we decided that each day we should give each one a cup of drinking chocolate because it's very healthy, it has polyphenols which enable you to combat a lot of things and vitamins and a lot of vitamins and other, you know, things. That would be 3 million cups of drinking chocolate a day. Do you know how much of an economy that will build?
As we try and wrap up, Mr. Grant, focus GIPC and also making sure that those who come in bring in the required jobs as you wrap up in just about a minute or so.
Right, yes, but I'm giving you an example where investment can create a major economy by making sure that every child has a cup of cocoa a day or a bar of chocolate a day. Now extrapolate that to West Africa, extrapolate that to the continent. Do you know how much of an economy that will build? It's very, very important. And so the real issue is how do we incentivize and enable our small companies to grow? It's very important. It's all about growth. How do you grow your economy? And although we are on track, and I expect that in 2021, the economy will grow at about 5.2, which is still much higher than many other countries in the world. And the World Bank and IMF has predicted that from 2022, it will grow at an average of beyond 5%, which is very impressive. Then we have to see how best we locate the local economy in that growth? How do we push the local economy to push that growth?
Mr. Grant, I thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate this so much. It has been PM Express, and we're so grateful to have the Chief Executive of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center as we talk about investment, the economy, the outlook. It looks like the prospects are quite bright for us in this economy. Have a great day.